Today I'm going to be cooking a all new piece of meat to me that I've never heard of before. So the piece of meat that I'm talking about is called Vacio. Now, the way that I stumbled upon this is I order a lot of meat from Porter Road, as you probably know. I really like their quality of meat. Their prices are all right. They're a little expensive compared to grocery store meat, but you're getting a much better quality piece of meat. Sometimes their cuts are a little on the small side, but again, the quality trumps everything for me. So I received an email from them saying that they have a new cut-to-order meat called Vacio. I've never heard of this piece of meat, so I looked at it, and the first thing I thought was this piece of meat looks just like a brisket, so I was immediately intrigued. Doing more research, I found it is very popular in Argentina in the asado style cooking. Knowing Argentina and the delicious meat that they cook, I knew this must be a fantastic cut of meat. The first thing I was thinking was, how about I take this cut of meat and smoke it like a brisket? That would be very interesting, and I'm sure it would come out fantastic. So I went ahead, placed my order for the Vacio, and as I waited for it to come in, did more research. And then recently I found that Jeremy Yoder from Mad Scientist Barbecue actually did a video on the Vacio very recently, cooking it like a brisket on his offset smoker. So before I saw that video, I already decided I was going to take this Vacio and try and cook it in a more traditional asado style direct heat cook. But I watched the video and it came out fantastic. It was a super juicy piece of meat. Looked very similar to a brisket, and with all the intermuscular marbling in the piece of meat, I knew it was going to be delicious. I wanted to go a different route, and I don't have an asado cooker. I do have my pit barrel cooker, which is direct heat, close, similar to asado style cooking, except for it has a lid on it. So that's the route I'm going to be going today. So doing my research, it was very tough to find videos of people cooking the Vacio. A lot of Vacios I found were just flap steaks, which is a delicious cut of meat. And I'm going to explain more about what cuts of meat are actually in the Vacio later. But I did find a few videos, and a couple of them featured the same guy going by the name of Al Fragone. He did a video with Max the Meat Guy. Highly suggest watching that video. It was an Argentine steak, the Vacio, versus an American steak in the tomahawk ribeye. So I watched his method of cooking, and I'm going to kind of follow these guidelines to cook this piece of meat. Let's go ahead, get the Vacio, and I'm going to show you what this thing's all about. All right, so before we get into this piece of meat, let me show you exactly where it comes from on the cow. And I'm going to try and draw this. My drawing skills aren't that great, so let's go ahead and try and draw a cow here. And we're going to kind of do just the 3/4 end of the cow. So here's your back leg, hip, then you're going to have your rib cage here. And as you know, the brisket's going to come from this section over here. So the Vacio is going to be this section right here on the cow. And it's going to be made up of 3 cuts of meat. So let's go ahead, open up this Vacio, and I'm going to show you. And you can see this is a large cut of meat here. So as I mentioned earlier, this reminded me of a brisket, and you can kind of see why. Similar shape, it's got the thick end like a point, then the thinner side like a flat. So this is going to be consisting of 3 cuts of steak, 3 of my favorite cuts of steak actually. So you're gonna have your flap steak up here, which is absolutely delicious. Your flank steak's gonna be down here, and then you're gonna have the inside skirt steak as well underneath here, underneath the flap, coming a little bit out here. So like I said, 3 of my favorite cuts of steak when separated, so I know this is going to be a delicious cut of meat. And there's not much trimming to do. I'm just going to take off some of these bits that are kind of hanging, and there's kind of a thick chunk of fat here I'm going to cut down. In the videos I watched, there was no trimming done, so I don't want to take too much fat off here. I just want to make sure it's going to render down properly, and it's pretty thick right here. Now, like I said, I'm going to be using the pit barrel cooker, so it's not much airflow like you would on an offset, so I'm not too worried about aerodynamics with this. And I know it's going to be a super tight fit on the pit barrel cooker, so if I can trim any edges down, I'm going to do that. Now you can see here on the side the different cuts of meat. and they're going to be layered between membranes, and with the fat and silver skin on both sides, which we're leaving on, it kind of keeps all that meat super juicy and just lets it cook in its own fat, and that's why it is so delicious. Now we'll flip it over. You can see this has a thick membrane on the bottom here. We're going to leave that on, and this is what's going to be going down towards the fire, and it's going to protect all that meat, keep those juices in, and this is going to get nice and crispy when it's done. But that's all I'm going to do for trimming, so let's go ahead and get this seasoned. So since we have this big membrane here, we're not going to really need to season this. But you can see here there's a few spots where it doesn't have a membrane, so I'm going to just go and hit it with a little bit of kosher salt on those spots, and we will go ahead and get this flipped over. Now the traditional Argentine style is just salt, but when I was watching some of those videos, he did use black pepper, so I'm going to go ahead and also add a little black pepper onto here. But you want a nice thick kosher salt, coarse. That's going to be your best bet for this. Now for the black pepper, I'm going to be using this butcher style black pepper. This is super coarse, and it has a great peppery flavor. Really brings out the richness of the meat. So I think this is going to be a great option for this Vacio today. We're going to go on with a little bit of pepper here. And we're not seasoning this like you would a brisket, where you go super heavy on your black pepper to get a nice crust, because we're not really looking for a bark on this like a traditional brisket. So that should be good. So I'll just pat this in, and we are going to be ready to get this on the pit barrel, which is going to be the fun part. Because this thing is huge, we're going to make it fit on that pit barrel. As it cooks, it'll shrink up, so it won't be too big a deal. So let's go ahead, get this out to the pit barrel, and try and get it on. All right, so I got the pit barrel all lit up. I'm using lump charcoal, and I have some cherry wood chunks in there. Let's go ahead and see if we can fit this giant Vacio in here. Oh, it's going to be tight. Doesn't really fit. We'll get it to fit, though. All right, you can see that's tight, but it will shrink up as it cooks. Now I want this to run a little hotter than usual, so I'm leaving the rods out of the pit barrel. Let's go ahead, get this lid on, and let this thing cook. All right, so the Vacio is on the pit barrel cooker just barely. Now I mentioned I left the rods out. That's because I wanted to get it a little bit hotter so it's more like a traditional asado style cook. Now let's talk a little bit about time and temperature of this. I couldn't really find any information on the temperature that you want to finish this at. Now I know from watching the video I could see that the meat was cooked more towards a brisket style of meat, where it is past overcooked, where it is super tender. So I'm thinking we're going to want it around 190 to 200 degrees, but I'm not positive on that because it wasn't super fall apart tender, because you have really good cuts of steak in there. So it's not really necessary to cook it that far. They will still be tender either way. Now in the Max the Meat Guy video that I watched, he did 3 hours on that membrane side, flipped it over for another hour, and then took it off, and that was it. And it looked like it came out absolutely fantastic. It looked so delicious. So I'm hoping that is the method we can do. Times might change a little bit because it isn't a asado style cooker, but I'm gonna let it go for 3 hours, then I'm gonna go check on it, see how that membrane's cooking. We wanna make sure the membrane gets nice and crispy, then we'll know it's time to flip. I'm also gonna check temperature just so we know where we're at. That's pretty much it. We're just gonna wait 3 hours, but for you guys, you won't have to, so let's jump ahead and go check on this delicious Vacio. All right, so it's been an hour on the Vacio, and smoke has been pouring out of this thing because of all the fat being rendered down. Let's see if you can get a good look at that. Yeah, that looks delicious. So let's check the temperature on this thing. And we're at about 164 there, 190 in the thinner end, 200 there. Right in the middle, 167 about. So it's looking pretty good for time-wise, I think. Now let's get this behemoth flipped over. Oh, that is hot. Now you can see all the smoke from that fat. See if that'll clear away so you can see this membrane nice and crispy. This is looking exactly how I wanted it to. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to see too much fat on this thing. Whew. baby. All right, we'll see when it's done, but I'm gonna go ahead and get the lid on this, and we're gonna cook this for another hour. Come back out, check the temp, and then I'm going to pull it off and let it rest. All right, it has been one more hour. Let's take a look. You can see it is still very smoky. It's all that fat, but you can see now that membrane, and if you can hear it, nice and crispy. So let's go ahead and get a temp check on this. We're about 172 here in the thick part. 170. We're at 206 there. 209 there. 170 still in this thick part. Yeah, about 170. 180 around the edges. So being that it's already 200 on this end, I think I'm going to go ahead and pull it because it looks about right. And like I said, we don't need to bring this up to that 200 degree all over to get it nice and tender like a brisket because of the cuts of steak that are involved here. So I'm going to get this off. We're going to let it rest probably for an hour. Then I will see you out there to slice it up and give it a try. Alright guys, here is the Vacio. This thing smells incredible. It looks fantastic, just like what I was hoping for. So this was a total cook of 4 hours. Not bad for such a large piece of meat. And like you saw out there, we were only up to about 180 in this thick end. But as I've been saying, I'm not really too concerned about that because the cuts of meat in here really don't need all that cooking to make them tender compared to something like a brisket where you have to bring that up to around 200 degrees to get that meat nice and tender. I let this rest for about an hour and we are here now. I'm going to slice this up because I cannot wait to see how this came out. But first, this is the membrane side, and you can see nice and crispy. That's what you want on these Vacios from what I've seen in the videos. Now, you're not going to cut this like a traditional brisket because, again, it's not a brisket. From the videos I've seen, they cut it right down in half like that. So that is what I'm going to be doing today. So enough talking. Let's cut this thing open. It is ridiculously juicy. You can see once you cut it open and break all those layers, the juice just pours out. I don't know if you can see this over here. And that smell is amazing. But let's go ahead, flip this over so you can take a look. And I'm not going to push it because I don't want to lose all this juice, but you can see it's just completely running down on this thing. And now you can see the different cuts of meat here. This is going to be your flap steak, your inside skirt, and your flank steak here. And you can see why they cut it right down the middle. We are cutting against the grain here on these. This might be not directly against the grain, but either way, it's close enough. So that's why you want to cut it right down the middle. So let's get this one out of the way for now, and we will focus on this. So you're not going to want to eat the membrane on this, but you can see it easily just peels right back. I mean, you might be able to eat it. Who knows? Should I give it a try? Yeah. It's a little chewy. Has great flavor though. But let's get into some of this meat here. Cut a piece of this off. And this is one of the juiciest pieces of meat I've ever seen. All right, so we got that off. That's going to be our flap and our skirt. So I'm going to separate these two. That's our flap. This is the inside skirt. I'll get a piece of each of these. Give it a try. Let's go with this flap steak here. Oh my God, the flavor on this is incredible. The fat's rendered down just enough where you get great flavor from it. But let me go ahead and try the skirt steak. That is so good. Because the skirt steak was on the top here, or the bottom when we cooked it. You have delicious crust here on the top that adds great flavor. The fat is just melt in your mouth, and that's where you're getting all the great flavor on this cut of meat. But still got one more over here, the flank, and this is going to be really tender. This is where we were probing at the 200 degree mark, and I could see it's kind of just falling apart here. You can see this. Yeah. So that's going to be the nice tender stuff there. Yeah, that is so good. That's definitely more like the brisket style that you'd get. Again, I like that skirt steak. It's got that nice crust on there, and all of this is tender, like I said, because those cuts of meat don't need all that cooking. So the fat rendered down great. So with those temperatures, I think that's an perfect temp for this. But the big thing about this is how juicy it is. The fat cap and the membrane do such a great job of holding all this juice in, and it really just cooks in its own fat. And that is where you're getting this great flavor on all these pieces of meat. So I would highly suggest picking one of these up and just giving them a try. Obviously, they're not going to be cheap, but for a 4-hour cook, and if you have a pit barrel cooker, this worked perfect on that. I'll put a link to Porter Road down below if you're interested in picking one of these up. They are cut to order, so not sure how readily available they will be, but if you can get one, definitely give it a try. This would be great for a big party with a bunch of people. You don't have to be spending all this time like you would with a brisket. 4-hour cook and you're done with a 1-hour rest. This is a great option instead of doing brisket. And honestly, I think I'd rather cook one of these over brisket any day. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a like. Along with the Porter Road stuff, I will put a link to everything I like to use in my videos down below as well. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe right over here. And if you want to see some more of my other videos, I'll leave some of them right over here for you. But most importantly, get out there and smoke something good.